Winter held on like a toothache. It clung to the high rangeland, refusing to let go, scouring the Wyoming-Montana trail with a wind that tasted of iron and distant snow. In the town huddled below the pass, the wind drove grit down the center of Main Street, rattling the high, false fronts of the saloon and the land office until they seemed ready to peel loose. Above it all, the cables of the mine tram sang a high, whining note, a constant reminder of the syndicate that owned the ground, the jobs, and the men. Mara Kincaid stood in the biting cold of the mercantile, her breath fogging the air, and took the final inventory of her life. What she owned fit in a small pile on Mr. Hoadley's counter, a cedar box, its scent faded, that had held her mother's letters, a heavy wool shawl, woven by her grandmother, its edges frayed but the pattern still strong, a small tin brooch shaped like a prairie rose, something her father had bought her at a fair when she was 12, and a leather-bound sketchbook filled with charcoal drawings of horses and hills, the pages warped by damp. She was selling her ghosts. Mr. Hoadley, a man whose spine had bent under the weight of his own ledgers, poked the shawl with a pencil. "It's worn, Mara, and the market for sketches ain't exactly booming." "It's good wool," Mara said, her voice quiet but firm, refusing to beg. "The box is sound." "The fare to Cheyenne is $40, he said, not looking at her. This is maybe 35. "I need 40, he sighed, the sound of a man annoyed by the poverty of others. "I can do $37, not a cent more. That's charity as it is, given the talk." Mara felt the familiar flush of heat on her neck. The talk. It followed her like a stray dog she couldn't shake. She pushed the pile forward. "I'll take it." He counted the scrip and coin, his fingers slow. She was short by $3. $3 that might as well have been the moon. She took the money and left the store, pulling her thin coat tight. The wind hit her instantly, stinging her eyes. As she passed the alley by the assay office, the whispers started, just loud enough to carry. "That's her, the Kincaid girl. Cursed, that one. Careless, killed those 2 draft horses. She did, burned the livery right down. Debt owing, too. Heard the sheriff's got a lien on whatever she earns." Mara kept her gaze fixed on the muddy boardwalk, her boots sinking slightly with each step. It wasn't her fault. The fire had been started by a drunkard's dropped lantern in the hayloft, but the man was gone by morning, and she had been the last one seen in the stable. The owner, needing someone to blame, had blamed her. The town, needing a pariah, had agreed. A heavy boot stepped into her path, blocking the light. She looked up. Alton Pike, the mine foreman, stood above her. He was a man built of straight lines and hard angles, his face clean-shaven and pale, his eyes the color of winter slag. "Miss Kincaid," he said, his voice flat, carrying no warmth. "I trust you haven't forgotten the safety levy you owe the syndicate." "I don't work for the syndicate, Mr. Pike. I don't owe a levy." "The fire you caused endangered syndicate property," he said, as if reciting from a manual. "The stability of the town is our concern. The levy stands $50. "I don't have $50. "We are aware," Pike said. He looked past her, down the street. "See Sheriff Dwyer. He manages our local accounts." He tipped his hat, a gesture of dismissal, not courtesy, and stepped around her. Mara's hands tightened into fists inside her pockets. She turned to go toward the boarding house, but another figure emerged from the sheriff's office, blocking her again. Sheriff Bram Dwyer was a different kind of predator. Where Pike was cold rock, Dwyer was wet mud, soft on the surface, but quick to pull you under. He was a large man, his belly straining his tin star, his face perpetually slick with sweat. Even in the cold, he smiled, a gesture that never reached his eyes. "Mara, just the woman I wanted to see. Pike mentioned your account." I can't pay it. Sheriff, I'm trying to leave town. Leave? He chuckled. A low, wet sound. Now, that's a shame. We'd miss you, but debts have to be settled. He leaned closer, and she smelled the sour mash whiskey on his breath. I might be able to help. The town has needs. The jail needs scrubbing. My office needs tending. He paused. I could find ways for you to work down that debt quietly, after hours. The implication hung in the air, thick and foul. He wanted her humbled. He wanted her broken, where everyone could see. Mara's chin came up. I'd rather freeze. Dwyer's smile vanished. That can be arranged. Don't you stray far, girl. Your town property until that levy is paid. He turned and walked away, leaving her shaking, not from the cold, but from the trapped, burning rage. A new sound cut through the wind, a low, massive wave of noise. The thunder of hooves and the long, yipping calls of men. A cattle drive, pushing hard to beat the storm, was rolling into the valley. Hundreds of beeves, thin and trail-worn, streamed past the edge of town toward the river pens, their horns clacking. Behind them rode a dozen drovers, faces caked in grime, shoulders hunched against the rising sleet. The town, smelling fresh wages, came alive. The doors to the Gilded Cage saloon swung open, spilling yellow light and the promise of warmth. The drovers dismounted, their spurs ringing on the boardwalk as they pushed inside, shouting for whiskey. One man remained separate. He was tall, his frame lean but broad in the shoulders, wrapped in a canvas slicker that had seen too much weather. He conferred with the trail boss, then turned his horse toward the mercantile. He moved with a quiet economy, nothing wasted. Eli Brecken had been on the trail for 2 months, pushing the herd north from Texas. All he wanted was a hot meal and silence. The trail boss had sent him to pay the herd supply bill, a duty he accepted because it kept him out of the saloon for another hour. He tied his horse, a tired-looking buckskin, and stepped onto the boardwalk. As he passed the sheriff, Eli nodded once, a curt gesture that was neither friendly nor challenging. Dwyer, recognizing a man who wasn't local and wasn't scared, just grunted in return. Eli settled the bill with Hoadley, his voice low and rough from disuse. He bought tobacco he didn't smoke for his partner, coop and 2 bags of grain for the horses. He hauled the grain toward the livery, the sleet turning sharp, stinging his face. The livery stable was a new, raw wood structure built on the ashes of the old one. Inside, it smelled of green lumber, cold hay, and manure. A young stable boy, maybe 14, was struggling with a skittish sorrel mare. The horse, terrified by the storm and the smell of strange cattle, was pulling back against the halter, her eyes wide. Easy, boy, easy, Eli said, dropping the grain sacks. The boy, Jesse, looked up, startled. She won't settle. Mister, she hates the wind. Most sensible beings do, Eli said. He didn't approach the horse. He just stood, unbuckling his slicker, moving slow. She's not afraid of you. She's afraid of that. He nodded toward the door, where the wind howled. He began to talk, a low, meaningless rumble about the weather in Kansas, about a dry creek bed he'd slept in. He didn't look at the horse, just moved closer to the stall, his energy calm and steady. The mare's ears flickered, turning toward the sound of his voice. Mara Kincaid had slipped into the livery to escape the main street. She needed a moment to think, to stop shaking from Dwyer's threat. She stood in the shadows by the tack room, watching. Eli reached the stall. He didn't offer a hand to the horse. He just leaned against the post, still talking. Jessie watched, mesmerized. Slowly, the sorrel's head dropped. Her breathing slowed. She took 1 step forward, then another, until her muzzle was almost touching Eli's sleeve. Only then did he slowly lift a hand, rubbing the spot between her eyes, his touch firm and sure. The mare let out a long, shuddering breath and leaned into his hand, "There now," Eli murmured. "It's just noise." Jesse stared. "How'd you do that?" "You just gotta be quieter than the storm," Eli said. He gave the horse a final pat and turned, picking up the grain. He saw Mara then. She was pressed against the wall, her face pale and strained, her coat inadequate. Their eyes met. Eli saw a fear in her that was deeper than any spooked horse. Mara saw the gentleness in his hands, and the trust he'd earned from the boy. It was a currency she hadn't seen in this town. She flushed, embarrassed at being caught watching, and slipped back out into the street. The sleet was turning to a hard, icy rain. She hurried to the stage agent's office. The agent was already closing. "Looking for the Cheyenne ticket?" he asked. Not unkindly. "Yes, I'll have the full fare tomorrow." He looked out the window at the sky, which was turning a bruised purple. "Might not matter. Miss, the river's rising fast with this melt. If it floods the low crossing, that stage ain't going anywhere. We'll know by morning." The door closed, and the lock clicked. Mara stood on the boardwalk, the rain freezing on her hair, trapped. Later that night, in her small room at the boarding house, Mara counted her money again by the light of a single kerosene lamp. $37. The ticket was $40. She was $3 short, and the world was trying to drown her. The room was on the second floor, overlooking the saloon. Downstairs, in the common room, a piano was playing a ragged tune, and the laughter of the drovers sounded harsh and jarring. Every burst of joy felt like a personal insult, a dare to hope when she had none left. In the gilded cage, the air was thick with smoke, sweat, and cheap whiskey. Eli Brecken sat at a back table, nursing a cup of coffee. His trail partner, Coop, a round, cheerful man, slapped him on the back. "You're a grim sight, Eli. That storm get under your skin?" Coop grinned, wiping beer from his mustache. "I tell you what this crew needs. Needs warmth more than whiskey. That little redhead by the bar looks plenty warm." Eli shook his head, pushing the coffee cup in small circles. "I'm just tired." "You're always tired," Coop said, his voice softening. "You carry this quiet around like a damn saddle sore. Son, we're paid. The herd's safe. Live a little." Eli looked at the crowd. He saw the frantic energy, the desperate grabbing at pleasure. It just made him feel older. He felt restless, sober, and hollow. He stood up, throwing a coin on the table. "I need air." He stepped outside, pulling his hat low. The icy rain had paused, leaving a cold, dripping silence. He stood under the saloon's wooden awning, letting the chill clear his head. Across the street, a figure hurried out of the mercantile, clutching a small paper bag. It was the woman from the livery, Mara. She had sold the tin brooch, the last piece of her childhood, for $2 and change. It wasn't enough, but it was all she had. She started to cross the muddy street, heading for the boarding house. Well, look who's out walking." Mara froze. Sheriff Dwyer stepped out from the shadows between the bank and the gunsmith. He must have been waiting. "You find that levy money, Mara?" "No, I told you, I don't have it." "What's in the bag?" He stepped in front of her. "It's my money, from the store." "Your money?" Dwyer laughed. "All money in this town passes through me. Girl, especially from debtors." He held out his hand. "I'm assessing a late fee, for the trouble of reminding you." "You can't," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I can—" He snatched the bag from her hand. He opened it, looked inside, and pocketed half the coins. He tossed the near-empty bag back at her. "Just a down payment." He put his hands on her shoulders, his thumbs digging in, forcing her to look at him. His face was inches from hers. "You think about my other offer. The jail is cold. Mara, my office is warm. Your choice." "Get your hands off me!" She twisted, pulling away from him with a strength born of pure revulsion. She stumbled back, shaking so hard she could barely stand. Dwyer just smiled. "You'll come around." He tipped his hat and walked back toward the saloon. Across the street, Eli had seen it. He had seen the sheriff's heavy hands, the snatching of the bag, and the way the woman recoiled. His own hand had gone to the butt of his pistol, but he'd held still. Shooting a lawman over a shakedown was a fast way to get hung, and he had a herd to deliver. But he watched Dwyer leave, and he watched Mara stand alone in the middle of the street, shaking in the dark. He crossed the street. She flinched when she saw him approach, pulling into herself. He stopped a few feet away, unwrapping the canvas slicker from his shoulders. He didn't say anything about the sheriff. He didn't ask if she was all right. He just held out the coat. It was dry on the inside. "Rain's held off for a minute," he said, his voice low. "But the air's heavy. Take this. I'll walk you to your door." She stared at the coat, then at his face. She saw no pity, just a plain, simple offer. She was too cold and too shaken to argue. She nodded, taking the heavy slicker and pulling it over her thin shoulders. It smelled of canvas, horse, and the faint, clean smell of the cold air. It was overwhelmingly large, and warmer than she'd been in days. They walked in silence. The mud sucked at their boots. When they reached the boarding house, the noise from the common room was louder. "Thank you," she said at the door. "Ma'am," he nodded, ready to turn away. She hesitated, the coat still around her. "You're with the cattle drive?" "Yes, ma'am." "You're leaving soon." "Soon as the river drops and the grass greens up. We're pushing to Montana." The thought of him leaving, of this small, strange kindness vanishing, was suddenly unbearable. The lantern in the corridor was turned low, casting deep shadows. Thunder rumbled, closer this time, shaking the flimsy building. "He'll be back," she said, her voice barely audible. "The sheriff, he said he'd be back." Eli looked at her. He saw the lie she was telling. Dwyer wasn't coming here tonight, but he would, eventually, and the fear of it was just as real as the man. He looked at the flimsy lock on her door. He looked at the darkness at the end of the hall. He thought of the sorrel in the stable, afraid of the noise. "I can sit in the hall," he offered, "just till morning." Mara looked down the dark corridor, then at him. He was a stranger, but she'd seen his hands. "The hall is colder than the street," she said. She opened her door. "You can take the chair. It's warmer than the hall." The room was small, with a sloped roof, a narrow iron bed, a washstand, and one wooden chair. The air was frigid. Eli entered, taking off his hat. The room felt charged, packed with tension. He took the chair, settling into it, balancing his hat on his knee. Mara sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing his slicker. The only sound was the wind and the distant piano. Hours seemed to pass. The piano stopped. The laughter died down. The house grew quiet, but the storm raged, the rain turning to ice against the glass. Neither of them slept. The cold in the room was a physical thing. It crept in through the floorboards, through the glass. Mara began to shiver, her teeth chattering silently. Eli stood up. He moved the chair, bracing it against the doorknob. "This is foolish," he said, his voice rough. "We'll freeze apart." She looked at him, her eyes wide in the gloom. "We can share the blanket," he said, "just for warmth. Nothing else. You have my word." She hesitated for only a second. She trusted him. She didn't know why, but she did. She nodded. He took off his boots, but left his denims and shirt on. He lay on top of the thin quilt, on the outside. Mara lay on the inside, pulling the slicker over them both. They lay back to back, two rigid spines, not touching. The cold was relentless. It ate through the wool, the canvas, the cotton. After another hour, Mara was shivering violently. Eli could feel the tremor through the mattress. He turned over. "It's not working," he whispered to the dark. He shifted, pulling the quilt up, and she turned toward him. They faced each other, inches apart. He was so large, a wall of warmth. She saw the silver line of the scar on his jaw in the faint light from the window. Fear gave way to a desperate, aching need. Not for a man, but for safety, for the simple, human comfort she had been denied for so long. She moved first, just a small shift, closing the distance. He met her halfway. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest, tucking her head under his chin. She was small and trembling, and she felt like a bird. He held her, his grip firm and steady. It was a shock, this tenderness. It was breath to breath, stillness against stillness. There was no shame in it. There were no oaths, no promises. It was just a vow to keep the cold out, to sleep until morning. And for the first time in a year, Mara slept without fear. Eli woke before the first hint of dawn. The room was gray and bitterly cold. The woman, Mara, was asleep in his arms, her face peaceful, the tension erased. He felt a powerful, protective urge that startled him. He held her for a moment longer. Then, carefully, slid his arm out from under her, replacing it with the thin pillow. She stirred, but didn't wake. He pulled his boots on quietly. He looked at the washstand, where her few coins lay scattered. He knew what he'd seen the sheriff do. He knew what a stage ticket cost. He reached into his own pocket. He took out $2 silver, a significant piece of his pay. He hesitated, then laid them on the washstand. He found his bandana, a clean one, folded it, and laid it beside the coins. A small, wordless help. He unbraced the chair and let himself out of the room, silent as a shadow, and headed back to the herd camp. When Mara woke, the room was bright with the flat, gray light of a flooded morning. She was alone, but the imprint of him was still on the mattress, the scent of canvas and cold air still on the pillow. She sat up, feeling a strange mix of profound rest and sharp confusion. Then she saw the washstand, the folded blue bandana, the $2 silver, shining against the dark wood. She picked up the coins. They were heavy, real. Her pride flared. She wasn't a charity case, but that was swallowed by a wave of gratitude so strong it made her knees weak. He hadn't bought her. He hadn't paid for the night. He had simply seen her need, and he had met it, without judgment, and without asking for a thing. The ache of being truly seen, without a price tag, was almost painful. She dressed quickly, a new, fragile hope in her chest. With this, and her $37, she had more than enough. She would be on the stage before Dwyer even woke. She grabbed her bag and ran to the agent's office. She was stopped by the sight of the river. It had breached its banks, swallowing the low crossing, swirling with debris and ice. Main Street was already a river of cold mud. The agent was tacking a sign to his door. "No passage. Road flooded." "When?" Mara asked, her voice cracking. "When will it run?" "Not for a week, miss. Maybe more." Defeat settled on her, heavy as a wet blanket. As she turned, she saw Sheriff Dwyer standing outside the Mercantile, drinking coffee with 2 of Pike's men. He saw her. He saw the sign. He saw her face. He smiled, a wide, knowing grin. He raised his voice, loud enough for the men and for the women passing by to hear clearly. "Morning, Mara. Shame about the flood. Looks like you're stuck with us." He winked at one of the miners. "Though I hear you found a way to make good wages last night. Heard you took one of those cowboys upstairs. Should have known you'd find a way to work down your debt." The men laughed. The women who heard it stared at her, their faces hardening with scorn. The gossip spread faster than the floodwater. The mud was deep, and it was rising. Mara stood alone, the silver dollars heavy as lead in her pocket. She was trapped. The new day broke gray and heavy, revealing a valley scoured by water. The river had crested, a brown, churning beast that had chewed away its banks. and the air smelled of cold mud and torn roots. Main Street was a bog. A freight wagon was sunk to its axles near the Mercantile, the team standing hip-shot and miserable. The boardwalks were slick with a film of silt. It was a world reduced to ruts and chill. Mara Kincaid woke to this, and to the sound of a hammer. She looked out her small window and saw Alton Pike tacking a fresh notice to the town message board. Even from her room, she could see the heavy, black letters of the headline, "Flood Damage Safety Levy." She dressed quickly. The silver dollars Eli had left still heavy in her pocket. They were a kindness she couldn't use, a ticket she couldn't buy. She pulled her grandmother's shawl tight, the one she hadn't been able to sell, and went down into the street. The mud grabbed at her boots, a cold, thick suction. A small group of merchants and miners stood reading the new notice. Pike had already moved on, his rigid back disappearing into the assay office. Mara pushed closer to read the text. The syndicate was imposing an immediate levy on all residents and businesses to pay for emergency reinforcement of the mine tram towers and the river levee, which, the notice claimed, had been damaged by the flood. All outstanding accounts were to be cleared before any goods or services could be rendered. At the bottom was a list of delinquent accounts. There were a dozen names. Hers was one of them, written in a bold, accusing script that stood out from all the others. Mara Kincaid, $50. A woman she recognized from the bakery read the name aloud and sniffed. $50, on top of the barn. She'll bring ruin on us all. Pike's right to call her out, a man in a miner's hat muttered. That kind attracts trouble. Mara's face burned. She was branded, publicly shamed and tethered to a debt she couldn't pay. Dwyer's lie about the night before had done its work. She was no longer just the careless girl. She was the fallen woman, and the town's designated sacrifice. She turned away, the whispers following her, and began the walk to the cafe. She had to find work. Miles upriver, at the herd camp. The world was just as wet but smelled cleaner. The cattle bawled, unhappy in the muddy pens, and the drovers huddled around a sputtering fire, trying to dry out. Eli Brecken hauled a sack of oats over his shoulder, his slicker beaded with mist. The supply run had been slow, the wagon dragging deep in the mud. Coop, his partner, was checking a hoof on his horse. That took you long enough, starting to think you found that redhead you were so keen on avoiding. Eli dropped the sack. The river's high, town's half drowned. And the other half is being skinned, Coop said, dropping the hoof. I was talking to the hostler at the livery. He says Pike and that fat-gut sheriff are squeezing every small rancher in this valley, using the flood as an excuse to call in notes, charging these levies for syndicate protection. Eli's face remained expressionless, but his eyes sharpened. He thought of Mara, of the sheriff's hands on her shoulders. That sounds like stealing. It's business, son, Coop said, wiping his hands on a rag. The hostler says there's a rumor. Pike and Dwyer, they keep a ledger, a separate one, logs every kickback, every false fine, every acre they've scared a man into selling for pennies on the dollar. That's how they're funding this whole operation. The syndicate gets its ore, and Pike and Dwyer get the cream. A ledger, Eli said, the words flat. Just a rumor, Coop said, clapping him on the shoulder. Ain't our fight, Eli. We get these beeves to grass, we get our pay, and we ride on. This town ain't nothing but a patch of mud to wipe off our boots. Eli looked south, toward the town huddled under the gray sky. Yeah, he said, his voice distant. Just mud. Mara pushed open the door to the Prairie Rose Cafe. The bell tinkled, and every head in the small room turned. The owner, Mrs. Gable, a woman with a face like a dried apple, stopped wiping the counter. We're full, she said, though 3 tables were empty. I'm not here to eat. Mrs. Gable, I saw your sign. You need a cook. The whispers from the occupied tables started instantly. Mara stood her ground, her hands clenched. I did. Mrs., Gable said, her voice rising, sharp with indignation. But I'm not desperate. This is a respectable place. Mara Kincaid. Families sit here. I'll not have my customers uncomfortable. I'm a hard worker. I can start right now. I said no. We've got standards. Now, please leave. You're upsetting the diners. Mara looked at the faces staring at her, the judgment, the cold satisfaction. She walked back out into the mud. Her next stop was the dressmaker's shop, a small room at the back of a house that smelled of boiled wool and dust. The dressmaker, a thin, tired woman, looked Mara over with weary eyes. I need sewing, the woman said. Mending, mostly, miners' clothes. It's hard on the hands. I can do it, Mara said, hope rising. It's pennies apiece, the woman warned. And you work in the back room, not the front shop. I can't have talk. Where? The woman pointed to a door. Mara opened it. The room was a storage space, barely larger than a closet, with no window and no stove. The cold was damp and piercing. She would freeze before she earned $1. I can't, Mara whispered, backing out. Suit yourself, the woman said, turning back to her cutting table. Mara wandered. She had no destination. She was an outcast, marked and unemployable. The town had locked its doors. She ended up near the livery, the only place that held a memory not stained with scorn. She saw the stable boy, Jesse, forking hay into a stall. He glanced out, saw her, and his eyes darted nervously up and down the street. He ducked back inside. A moment later, he reappeared at the edge of the wide door, holding something in his hand. He whistled, a low, soft sound. Mara approached. You shouldn't be here, Miss Kincaid, he said, not looking at her. The sheriff was by, asking about that drover. I'm just walking. You look hungry. He thrust his hand out. In it was a large, floury biscuit, split and filled with molasses. Took it from the cookhouse. They won't miss it. Mara's throat tightened. She took the biscuit, the first kindness she'd known in 2 days that wasn't from a stranger passing through. Thank you, Jesse. You shouldn't let him do it, he muttered, kicking at a clump of mud. What Pike and Dwyer are doing? I don't have a choice. Mr. O'Rourke says everyone has a choice. The carpenter? Yes'm. He's building the new stalls. He says the sheriff is cooking the fines, says that levy on you is hogwash. He told my PA the whole town's being robbed, but everyone's too scared of Pike to say boo. Mara ate the biscuit, the sweet molasses and salt stinging her cold mouth. What good does talk do? Mr. O'Rourke. He just talks, Jesse admitted. But his wife, she does things. Mrs. O'Rourke. She's the midwife. Folks trust her, the women. Anyway, she ain't scared of Pike, and she sure ain't scared of the sheriff. Maybe you should talk to her. He glanced over his shoulder as the hostler yelled his name. Gotta go! He disappeared into the barn's shadows. Mara stood there, the boy's words settling in her. She does things. It was a revolutionary thought. That evening, the sleet returned, sharp needles driven by a rising wind. Eli Brecken found himself in town again, on a useless errand for Coop who'd lost a glove. He was walking past the Prairie Rose Cafe, his head down, his hat pulled low. He wasn't looking for her. He told himself that. He was just walking. He glanced through the window, past the fogged glass and the neatly painted letters. She was inside, standing at the counter, her back to the door. She was trying to sell something to Hoadley, the storekeeper, who also ran the small cafe counter in the evenings. It was the cedar box, the one she'd had on the counter the day before, the one she hadn't sold. It was the last link to her mother. It's fine cedar, Mara was saying, her voice low but desperate. It's worth $5. Easy. Hoadley shook his head, polishing a glass. I'll give you $1, Mara, and that's just for the wood. The box itself. Well, it's got your name on it, don't it? Tainted. $1. Take it or leave it. It's a reputation discount. Mara's shoulders slumped. She picked up the box, holding it to her chest, and turned to leave. As she turned, her eyes met Eli's through the glass. He was standing in the sleet, frozen in place, watching her. The look that passed between them was a jolt, sharp and sudden as the cold. He saw her humiliation, her desperation, and the stubborn pride that refused to break. She saw his stillness, the quiet intensity, and the shame he felt for witnessing her pain. It was mutual, and it was frightening. It was a pull that neither of them had asked for, a silent promise that he was here, and she was seen. Mara broke the gaze first, clutching the box as she pushed past him out the door and ran toward the boarding house, her face burning. Eli stayed in the street, the sleet melting on his face. He turned and walked toward the one place he didn't want to go, the gilded cage. He needed a drink. He pushed through the doors. The saloon was loud, thick with the smoke and anger of men trapped by the weather. He ordered a whiskey and took it to the back wall, standing in the shadows. A group of Pike's miners were at a nearby table, drunk and loud. "Heard Dwyer finally cornered the Kincaid girl," one of them said, slamming his mug down. "About time." "Heard she's paying her levy on her back," another laughed. "Took that tall drover upstairs for $2? $2? The first one slurred. "I'd pay $3 to see if she's as cursed as they say." Eli's hand tightened on his glass. He kept his eyes on the floor. "Not your fight? Right on." A miner at the bar, hearing them, yelled, "She's poison! Ought to run her out on a rail!" He grabbed an empty beer bottle from the counter and drew his arm back, aiming to smash it against the wall near the door. "That's what I think of her." Before the bottle could leave his hand, Eli's arm shot out. He didn't grab the man, he grabbed the bottle, his grip like a steel trap on the man's wrist. The bottle stopped, inches from his fingers. The saloon went quiet. The miner, drunk and confused, tried to yank his arm free. "What the hell?" Eli's voice was low, almost a whisper, but it cut through the room. "Don't waste the glass. The man who sweeps this floor didn't do anything to you." He twisted his wrist, a short, sharp movement. The miner yelped as his fingers went numb, and the bottle dropped to the floor, rolling harmlessly onto the sawdust. Eli released him. He put his own untouched whiskey on the bar. He looked at no one. He said nothing more. He turned and walked out of the saloon, leaving a room full of stunned, angry men behind him. He had stopped a bottle. He hadn't defended her name. He'd left before it could become about her. Mara had fled to her room, but she couldn't stay there. Jesse's words came back to her. "Mrs. O'Rourke, she does things." She found the carpenter's shop, a small, sturdy building behind the church. There was a light on in the house next to it. She knocked on the house door. A woman opened it, wiping her hands on an apron. She was in her 40s, with kind, tired eyes and graying red hair pulled back in a tight bun. This was Nora O'Rourke. "Yes?" "Mrs. O'Rourke, my name is Mara Kincaid. Jesse, at the livery. He said I should—" Nora's expression didn't change. She didn't scowl or close the door. She just waited. "I need work," Mara said, the words rushing out. "I'll do anything. I'll scrub. I'll clean. I'll mend." Nora looked at her, a long, appraising gaze that saw the pale face, the desperation, and the hands that were clenched at her sides. "Do you have a strong stomach, child?" Yes." "Good. Get your coat. I'm needed out at the Ryland Ranch. His wife is in labor, her first, and the storm is making her panic. You can carry my bag." They walked fast, Nora setting a hard pace, cutting through the back alleys, away from Main Street. The Ryland Ranch was a small soddy on the edge of town, huddled against a rise. Inside, a young woman was on a cot, her face pale with sweat, her husband wringing his hands by the stove. "She's been like this for hours. Nora," the man said, his voice high with fear. "It's her time, Tom. It's supposed to be like this," Nora said, her voice a balm of calm authority. She turned to Mara. "Get the water boiling, all of it, and tear those sheets into strips. Clean ones." For the next 3 hours, Mara worked. She boiled water. She wiped the young woman's face with a cool cloth. She held her hand, whispering to her, not of comfort, but just simple things, that she was strong, that the storm was passing, that she was not alone. When the panic rose in the woman's eyes, Mara learned to quiet it with the steady pressure of her hands, with a low, firm voice that mirrored Nora's. At dawn, a thin, wailing cry filled the small room. Nora finished cleaning the baby and handed the swaddled bundle to the weeping mother. Nora looked at Mara, who was slumped against the wall, exhausted but smiling. "You did well, child," Nora said quietly. "You have good hands. Steady." As they walked back to town in the bruised, cold light, Nora stopped. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a coin. It was a 50-cent piece. "For your help," Nora said. I didn't." "You earned it." Nora pushed the coin into Mara's hand. "I need help at the clinic, cleaning, mostly, but also carrying blankets to the ranch women who can't come to town. It pays modest, but it's honest." Mara closed her hand around the coin. It was the first honest money she'd earned in months. "Yes, thank you. Mrs. O'Rourke, yes." She was walking back to the boarding house, the coin clutched in her pocket, when Sheriff Dwyer stepped out of the alley by the general store. 2 of Pike's men were with him, leaning against the wall, whittling. "Hold up, Mara," Dwyer called out. Mara's heart sank. She stopped. "Mister, Hoadley says you were in his store last night, says you were angry." "I was trying to sell a box." "He says you were the last one at his counter, and this morning, his cash box is light by $2 silver. Mara's blood ran cold. She thought of the $2 on her washstand. "I didn't steal anything." "Funny," Dwyer said, stepping closer. "You told me yesterday you had no money, but the whole town heard you took that drover up. Now Hoadley's missing $2. Seems you found a way to get paid after all, one way or another." "That's a lie." "Is it?" Dwyer nodded to Pike's men, who straightened up, suddenly witnesses. "She's got a history of it, careless, causes trouble, now a thief. Empty your pockets, girl." "No!" She backed away. "Empty your pockets, or I'll empty them for you in a cell." "There's no need for that. Sheriff." Eli Brecken stepped out of the darkness from the mouth of the same alley. He moved with no sound, a shadow detaching from the wall. He wasn't wearing his slicker, and the sleet was already freezing to his shoulders. He stood between Mara and the sheriff. Dwyer's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. "This ain't your business, Cowboy." "I was just in the mercantile," Eli said, his voice low and steady, almost conversational. "Buying coffee. Mister, Hoadley seems fine. Didn't mention any theft to me." "He mentioned it to me," Dwyer snarled. "Now step aside." "The lady says she didn't take it," Eli said. He held his hands up slightly, open and away from his body. "But if you're looking for a thief, search me. I was on the street last night. 2, he took a step toward Dwyer. "Go on, Sheriff, search my pockets. Or we can search the area. Maybe the thief dropped it right here." He was calling the bluff. It was a brilliant, dangerous move. Dwyer was accusing Mara based on rumor. A public search of a drover who had witnesses and a trail boss would be a problem. A search of the ground that turned up nothing would make him look like a fool. Dwyer looked at Eli's cold, calm eyes and saw a man who wasn't bluffing. He looked at Pike's men, who were just hired muscle, not lawmen, and they offered no support. Dwyer's face turned a dull red. He was trapped. I'm letting you go, Mara, he said, his voice a low growl, pointing a thick finger at her. For now. But you watch your step. I'll make you pay for this. Both of you. He turned and stalked off, his men following like dogs. Mara was shaking, her relief so profound she felt dizzy. Eli stood for a moment, watching them go. Then he turned to her. He didn't say a word. He just nodded toward the boarding house, and they walked, back in her small, cold room. The door braced shut with the chair, the fear and relief unspooled. Mara sat on the bed, her hands over her face. He would have arrested me. He would have. He was blowing smoke, Eli said, his back to the door, watching the street below. But he's mad now. He won't let it go. Mara looked up. Why did you do that? You don't even know me. Eli turned from the window. The room was dark, the lamp unlit. I was in the saloon. I heard what they were saying. He looked down at his own hands. I left. I shouldn't have. You shouldn't have been there at all. With me. Last night. He met her gaze. His face was shadowed, the scar on his jaw a pale line. Last night, he said, his voice rough. Last night felt like breathing. After weeks of dust, I'm not sorry for it. The admission hung in the air, simple and true. I'm still leaving. Eli, she whispered, the words tasting like a lie even as she said them. Soon as that river drops, I'm gone. I know, he said. He didn't move to the chair. The pretense of safety was gone. The danger was real. And it was outside the door. He sat on the bed, leaving a respectful distance between them. But the room was too small, the night too cold. The distance between them shrank. It was more urgent this time. A conscious turning toward each other. The emotional barriers, so carefully held in place, were thinning. He touched her face, his fingers rough from rope and leather, tracing the line of her jaw. She didn't flinch. She leaned into his touch. Desire was vivid in the room, sharp as the sleet on the glass. It wasn't just for warmth. It was for the solid, living proof that they were not alone. He kissed her, and it wasn't the chaste, fearful comfort of the night before. It was a claim, a question, an answer. Their hands moved, learning the shape of each other. They spoke in whispered truths. He told her about the dust, about the hollowness of the trail, about running from a quiet farm in Ohio that he couldn't save. She told him about the fire, about the smell of the smoke, and the deep, abiding shame of being blamed for something she didn't do. They clung to each other, shedding the layers of their shame and their solitude. Their intimacy was a fierce, quiet rebellion against the town, against the mud, against the cold. They slept tangled together, a knot of shared warmth and stubborn survival. When the sun rose, they separated with a shared, unspoken resolve. They were in this now. Eli met Coop at the edge of the herd camp. The rain had stopped. You look like hell, Coop said, offering him coffee. Eli took the tin cup. I'm finishing the drive. Coop, I'll see the herd to Montana. That's the job. But I'm not riding on. Not yet. I want the truth about Pike and Dwyer. I want to know about that ledger. Coop stopped stirring the fire, his face serious. Eli, that ain't our business. That girl, she ain't our business. She is now. Coop sighed, looking at his friend. He saw the set of his jaw, the hardness in his eyes. You go poke in that hornet's nest. Son, you're gonna get bit. The truth in this town don't set anyone free. It just gets 'em buried. Eli drank the coffee. It was bitter, but it was hot. Let 'em bite. The sun finally broke the back of winter. It came with a warm wind from the south, a chinook that pushed through the valley and fought the cold. The floodwaters receded, pulling back from Main Street like a dirty sheet, leaving a sour, vegetal stink and a deep layer of debris. Fences were down. Sheds were flattened. But the water had scoured the land. And almost overnight, The high hills glowed with the pale, fierce green of new grass. Life in the town resettled, but the lines of power had been drawn tighter. Nora O'Rourke, true to her word, hired Mara. Her new life began with a broom and a bucket of lye soap at the small clinic Nora ran from 2 rooms attached to her house. The work was hard, scrubbing floors, boiling bandages, and washing linens stained with sickness and childbirth. But the work also took her out of the town's center. Nora began sending her on deliveries, carrying blankets, dried herbs, and laudanum to the isolated ranch women in the surrounding hollows. Mara's presence was a rock dropped in a pond. The gossip followed her, quiet and sharp. When she delivered a package to the mercantile, women would fall silent, turning their shoulders. Mrs. Gable at the cafe watched her pass by, her face a mask of disapproval. One woman, receiving a bundle of clean swaddling, took it from Mara's hands, looked her up and down, and shut the door in her face. But there was also gratitude. A young wife, whose husband was laid up with a mine injury, took a jar of broth from Mara and clutched her hand for a moment. "Nora saved my boy," she whispered, nodding to a cradle. "God bless you for helping her." It was a quiet currency, this gratitude, but it was solid in her pocket, more real than the whispers. She learned to walk with her head up. She was no longer just the cursed girl. She was Nora O'Rourke's helper, a position that gave her a thin, borrowed armor of respectability. Eli, meanwhile, had not left. The cattle drive had moved on to better grass north of the floodplain, but he'd told Coop he was staying, taking his pay and settling his account. He claimed he was waiting for the ground to firm up before riding to find a new outfit. Coop knew it was a lie, but he'd just nodded, given Eli his share, and ridden north with the herd. Eli didn't stay idle. He found work with Mr. O'Rourke, the carpenter, and the church sexton, a man named Silas Hallowell. The storm had loosened shingles on the church roof and damaged a strut in the belfry. Eli, solid and quiet, was a natural builder. One afternoon, Mara passed the church and saw him. He was on the roof, stripped to his undershirt, his back and shoulders broad against the new spring sky. He was hammering shingles, the rhythm steady and sure. He didn't see her. He was working alongside O'Rourke and Mr. Hallowell. She paused in the alley, watching. The men on the roof were talking, their voices carrying in the clear air. "It's the 3rd accident this season," O'Rourke was saying, his voice angry as he pried at a warped board. "Young Timbers, a good man, and Pike says he just slipped near the ore cart. Slipped, with a $200 syndicate insurance payout for a broken leg. Pike is meticulous about safety." "Mr. Hallowell offered, his voice reedy. "He says so in his reports." "He's meticulous about reports." "You mean," O'Rourke shot back, "he falsifies them. I'd stake my hammer on it, fakes an accident, claims the insurance, and the syndicate is none the wiser. Keeps the man quiet with a small piece, and splits the rest with Dwyer, who signs the official town report. It's theft, plain and simple." "That's a heavy accusation. Samuel," the sexton murmured, clearly nervous. "It's a heavy boot on our necks." Eli said nothing. He just kept hammering, his rhythm unbroken. But Mara saw his head was cocked slightly, listening. He was becoming part of the town's muscle, its framework. He was earning the trust of the men who built and buried, and he was listening to the rot in the beams. Mara carried this new information with her, a cold knot in her stomach. That evening, as she was helping Nora clean the clinic, Jesse, the livery boy, slipped in. He was bringing a message from a rancher for Nora. When she stepped into the back to write a reply, Jesse turned to Mara. "That drover friend of yours," he whispered, his eyes wide. "He's still here. I seen him on the church roof." "He's working, Jesse, that's all." "He's asking questions. My PA heard him asking about the assay office, about who comes and goes." Mara stopped folding a bandage. "What about the assay office?" Jesse leaned closer, his voice dropping. "It's where Pike and Dwyer meet, late, after the saloon closes. They drink in Pike's office. I seen 'em. I was delivering a message for a miner one night, and I went round back. They were in there, laughin', and I seen Pike. He went to his big desk, the one by the window. He pushed something on the side, and a little drawer popped out, under the main ones. A hidden one. A hidden drawer." Mara's heart hammered. A ledger of kickbacks. "Jesse," Nora said, returning. "You tell your PA that Mare needs the poultice changed every 4 hours. You understand?" "Yes'm." Jesse glanced at Mara, a quick, meaningful look, and then bolted out the door. That night, Mara waited for Eli. She sat in her small room, the lamp turned low, listening to the town settle. It was past 9 o'clock when she heard his light, firm step in the hall. She opened her door before he could knock. He stepped inside, filling the small space. He brought the clean scent of sawdust and cold night air with him. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. "You heard him," she said, not a question. "O'Rourke, yes, he's right." "And I know where they keep it," Mara said, her voice shaking. "Jesse told me. Pike has a hidden drawer in his desk at the assay office." Eli went still. He looked at her, and the quietness in him became something sharp and dangerous. "Deacon Hales," he said. "What?" "The mine bookkeeper. O'Rourke mentioned him. A man named Deacon Hales. He's the only one besides Pike who works in that office. He's a nervous man. O'Rourke said, afraid of his own shadow. Pike rides him hard. If there's a ledger, Hales keeps it. He's the one we have to talk to." "How? He won't talk to us. He's Pike's man." "He's a man with a sick wife," Eli said. "O'Rourke told me. His wife has lung fever, and their child is small. Pike controls the town doctor, and the doctor controls the medicine from the syndicate store. Hales is trapped." "Then we have to untrap him," Mara said, the words surprising her with their firmness. They found him the next evening at dusk. Deacon Hales was a wisp of a man, with a thin neck and spectacles that seemed too large for his face. He left the assay office precisely at 6 o'clock, carrying a small, empty lunch pail. He walked with his head down, taking the back alleys to avoid the saloon. Eli stepped out from behind the blacksmith shop, blocking his path. Hales let out a small, terrified squeak and dropped his pail. "Mr. Hales," Eli said, his voice low, not threatening. "We need a word." I have nothing to say. I have to get home." Hales scrambled to pick up his pail, his hands shaking. Mara stepped out from the other side. "Mr. Hales, my name is Mara Kincaid. Nora O'Rourke sent me." Hearing the midwife's name made Hales pause. He looked at Mara, his eyes blinking rapidly behind his glasses. "Mrs. O'Rourke, is it my wife, Anna? Is she worse?" "No," Mara said gently. "She's the same. But Nora is worried about her. She's worried she's not getting the right medicine. The laudanum, mister. Pike approved isn't enough for the pain." Hales's face crumpled. "It's all he'll allow. The doctor, Miles. He does what Pike says. I can't get more." "We know about the ledger. Mr. Hales," Eli said, cutting to the bone. Deacon Hales turned white. "I don't know what you're talking about. It's lies. I have to go." He tried to push past, but Eli put a hand on his shoulder. It wasn't violent, just firm, immovable. "The one in the hidden drawer," Eli said. "The one you write in every Friday, after Pike and Dwyer count their money." Hales stopped struggling. He looked like a man about to be sick. You're trying to ruin me. If he finds out, he'll kill me. He'll let Anna die." "He's letting her die now," Mara said, her voice sharp but not unkind. "He's using her to control you. You know what he's doing is wrong. You know he's stealing from men with broken legs. You know he put a levy on me for a fire I didn't start. I just write what I'm told, Hales whispered, his eyes wet. I'm a bookkeeper. We don't want to ruin you, Deacon, Eli said. We want to stop him. We need proof. We need copies of those pages. A circuit judge is due in a few days. With proof, he can be stopped. Dwyer, too. Copies? No, I can't. The office is locked. There's a guard. We have a plan, Mara said, the idea forming as she spoke, built from all the pieces they had gathered. We just need you to say yes. Hales looked from Eli's hard, steady face to Mara's intense one. He was trapped between a lion and a cliff. He finally gave a small, jerky nod. What is it? They met in O'Rourke's workshop after dark, the four of them, surrounded by the smell of pine shavings and glue. Nora, O'Rourke, Eli, and Mara. It's too dangerous, O'Rourke said immediately, slamming his hand on the workbench. Pike has a night guard, a thug named Cowboy, and Hales is a rabbit. He'll bolt. He'll bolt if he's alone, Mara said. I'll go with him. I can get the key. He keeps a spare for the front and office door on a hook in the main hall. For the doctor. Nora and I have both seen it when we've gone to the clinic late. That's madness. Girl, O'Rourke said. It's not, Nora said, her voice cutting through. The plan is sound, but the timing has to be perfect. She looked at Eli. You need to get Pike out of the office. And O'Rourke, you need to handle the guard. Calloway drinks, O'Rourke said, rubbing his jaw. He sits in the saloon until 10 o'clock, but after that, he's at his post, distracting him. That's risky. No, Eli said. We don't distract the guard. We distract Pike. O'Rourke, you said Pike was worried about the tram tower by the river, the one the flood almost took. He's obsessed with it. It's his main artery to the mine. Then we give him a reason to check it, Eli said. Tonight, at 10:30, you and I will make a noise down by the river base. Make it sound like timber splitting, like the supports are giving way. He'll come running, and he'll bring Calloway with him. He won't leave his precious tower to one man. Nora nodded, picking up the thread. And while they're gone, Dwyer, we have to keep him pinned down. I'll send Jessie to the jail with an emergency. A rancher's wife, out on the North Road, bleeding. He'll have to respond. He has to keep up appearances. That will get him out of the saloon and away from the center of town for at least an hour. And that leaves me and Deacon, Mara said. The office will be empty. We get the copies and we get out. Copies, Mara, not the ledger, O'Rourke said, his face grim. Don't be a fool. Just the copies. Take his ink and his copy paper. It'll be enough. The night felt taut as a stretched wire. The wind had picked up again, carrying the bitter smell of coal smoke from the mine. Lamps in windows looked like watching eyes. At 10 o'clock, Mara slipped into the clinic. The hallway was dark. She found the hook. The ring of keys was cold in her hand. She met Deacon Hales in the alley behind the church. He was shaking so hard he could barely stand. Courage, Deacon, she whispered, grabbing his arm. Think of Anna. At 10:15, Jessie ran, breathless, into the saloon. Yelling for Sheriff Dwyer about a woman dying on the North Road, Dwyer cursed, grabbed his coat, and thundered out of the saloon. At 10:30, a loud crack, like a massive tree splitting, echoed up from the riverbank. Mara, hiding with Deacon in the shadows across from the assay office, saw the light in Pike's window go out. The front door opened. Pike emerged, followed by Calloway, the guard. Bring the heavy lanterns, Pike snapped. And your rifle. Someone's messing with the supports. They hurried off toward the river. Now, Mara said. She ran across the street, Deacon stumbling behind her. Her hand was shaking as she tried the key. The lock clicked. They slipped inside. The office was dark, smelling of stale cigar smoke and ink. Where is it? Mara whispered. The desk. His desk. Hales fumbled for a match, lit the small desk lamp, and turned the wick down to a bare flicker. He went to the heavy oak desk, his hands trembling. He felt along the carved wooden side, pushed, and a drawer, thin and flat, snapped open near his knee. He pulled it out. It was full, a ledger, and stacks of loose paper. "There," he breathed. "That's the ledger. These are his notes." "We need the book," Mara said. No, he'll know. He'll know." "Deacon, look." Mara pointed to a stack of official-looking syndicate forms. "Copy paper and ink." She grabbed a pen. "Find the pages, the accident reports, the levies. Find mine." Hales's hands were clumsy, but he knew the book. He flipped pages, his finger running down columns. "Here, Rylan, broken leg, insurance, $300. Paid to Rylan, $50. He flipped again. "Here, Kincaid, Mara, public safety levy, non-inspection of fire damage, $50. "Non-inspection?" Mara said. "What does that mean?" It means no one ever inspected it," Hales whispered, his face sheet white. "He just wrote it. There was no inspection. It's a false entry." "Copy it," Mara said, her voice iron. "Copy it all." Hales dipped the pen, his fingers smudged with black ink. He began to write, his pen scratching in the silence. It was slow, agonizing. Suddenly, Mara heard it. Boots, on the boardwalk outside, heavy. Calloway. "Get down!" she hissed. She shoved Hales, who collapsed behind the desk. Mara blew out the lamp and dove, rolling under the desk, pressing herself against the floorboards. She pulled her skirt in, praying. The front door opened. The office was plunged into darkness. "Mr. Pike?" Calloway's voice boomed. "He said to fetch the tower schematics. Left him on his desk." Mara held her breath. She could smell the floor wax, the dust, the sour tang of Hales's fear next to her. Calloway's heavy boots scraped on the floor, moving toward them. He stopped right in front of the desk. Mara could see the worn soles of his boots. He lit a match. The sudden flare blinded her. He grunted, finding the roll of papers on the desk. He stood there, the match burning down. He looked around the dark office, suspicious. He heard nothing but the wind. He shook the match out, plunging them back into darkness, and walked out, closing the door. They waited, hearts hammering. A soft sound came from the window. 2 sharp, quiet taps. "Eli, it was the signal. Clear!" Mara crawled out, her knees weak. "Light the lamp! Deacon, finish!" Hales was sobbing quietly. I can't. Let me go. He'll kill me." Mara grabbed the pen and the ledger. "Show me where. I'll write." But her hands were shaking too badly. The ink blotched. "We need the book, Deacon, or these copies. All of them." Hales scrambled to finish the page on Mara's levy. "That's all. I can't. Please, let's go." "The originals," Mara said, looking at the ledger. "We need the originals." "No!" Hales grabbed the book, clutching it to his chest. "He'll know I took it. My wife. He'll bleed her dry. He'll hold back the medicine." Mara looked at the terrified man. He was broken. She couldn't force him, but she couldn't leave with just one smudged copy. "Deacon," she said, her voice low and fierce. "Give me the copies you made. Just the copies. And you go home. You say nothing. I will go to Nora. I will get your wife medicine. Real medicine. Not the watered-down laudanum Pike gives the doctor. I will have Nora brew her a tea for the fever. And I will steal the good laudanum from the clinic lockbox myself if I have to. I swear to you, your wife will not suffer. But you have to help us finish this." Hales looked at her, seeing the absolute, unbreakable promise in her eyes. It was a vow. He fumbled, gathering the 5 or 6 pages he had managed to copy. He thrust them at her. "Go," he whispered. "Take them. Just don't let him know." They slipped out the back door. As they reached the alley, the church bell began to toll the late hour. 11 o'clock. A horse snorted from the livery, and they heard the guard's voice yell, "Who's there?" They pressed themselves into the shadows as the guard, Calloway, walked past the alley, his lantern swinging. The light washed over the wall just inches from Mara's face. He stopped, listened, and then, satisfied, walked on. The night swallowed them. Mara didn't go to her room. She went to Eli's, a small rented room above the blacksmith's shop. He was there, O'Rourke with him. They had mud on their boots. "It worked," Eli said, the relief in his voice palpable. "He bought it. He's setting a double watch on the tower all night." Mara opened her hand. The copied pages were crumpled and stained with ink. "We got this," she said. "Deacon, he couldn't. He was too afraid. But we got this. It shows the accident kickbacks. And it shows my levy. It was false. Non-inspection." Her hands began to shake, the reaction setting in. The paper fluttered to the floor. O'Rourke picked it up. "Good God. Girl," he breathed, reading the page. "This is it." He looked at them, his face hard. "The circuit judge, Judge Bryson, is due in 3 days. For the spring hearings. This will hang them." He folded the papers and put them inside his coat. "I'll keep these safe, in my shop, under the floorboards. You two, you lay low. Pike will be mad as a hornet when he finds his office has been touched. And he'll look at you, girl. He'll look at both of you." O'Rourke left. Mara and Eli were alone in the small room. The adrenaline was gone, leaving a bone-deep weariness and a vibrating, terrifying relief. Mara's hands were still shaking. She couldn't stop them. Eli stepped forward. He didn't speak. He just took her hands in his. His were warm, calloused, and steady. He held her wrists until the trembling eased. Then he lifted her hands, one by one, and kissed her knuckles. It was a gesture of profound tenderness, an acknowledgement of the terror she had faced. Desire surged, braided tight with the relief. It was a desperate, clinging need to affirm that they were alive, that they had won this small battle. She leaned into him, and his arms went around her, pulling her tight. He kissed her, and the taste of the coal smoke and the night's fear was still on her lips. They clung to each other, their bodies speaking a language of shared risk and fierce loyalty. There was no gentleness in it now, but a raw, urgent need. They were in this, together, and the awareness that morning could bring ruin only made the moment more vital. After, they lay tangled in the narrow bed, the moonlight striping the floor. 3 days, Mara whispered into his shoulder. "We have to live through 3 days." Eli held her, his arm a solid bar across her waist. "We will." Alton Pike was not a fool. He was a man of cold, precise ledgers, and he knew when his accounts were out of balance. He stood in his office the morning after the failed riverbank alarm, and he knew. The chair was not angled correctly. The inkwell on his desk was a fraction of an inch to the left of the stain where it always sat. The stack of syndicate copy paper was uneven. He pulled open the hidden drawer. The ledger was there, just as he had left it, but the room felt violated. He looked out the window. The false alarm, the simultaneous and convenient emergency that had pulled Dwyer from town. It was too clean. It was an organized attack. He knew, with a certainty that settled like ice in his gut, that they had been inside. They hadn't taken the ledger, which meant they had copied it. He locked the office door. He walked to the jail, his steps measured. "Dwyer," he said to the sheriff, who was nursing a coffee. "We have a leak." Dwyer sat up. "What? How?" "It doesn't matter. The cowboy, Brecken, he's the new element. He's the one who stood up to you. He's the one seen with the Kincaid girl. He's the one giving them courage. I want him gone, or I want him caged." Dwyer's eyes lit with a dull, pleased malice. He had his own score to settle. He's outsider trouble, Dwyer said, the words tasting good. Inciting unrest. It won't be hard to prove. See that it's done, Pike said, and left. The opportunity came that afternoon. Coop, Eli's trail partner, was loading their spare wagon near the livery, making a final run for supplies before he followed the herd north. Eli was with him, helping tie down a rain canvas. You're a fool for staying, Eli. Coop was saying, this ain't your range. That girl. Just get the wagon loaded. Coop! 3 miners rounded the corner. They were off shift, their face grimed with coal dust, and they smelled of the whiskey Pike had clearly provided. They fanned out, blocking the wagon. Well, looky here, the largest one said. It's the cowboy's partner. Eli tensed, stepping in front of Coop. We don't want trouble. We're leaving. That's the problem, the miner sneered. Your partner ain't. Pike says your kind ain't welcome, stirring up good folks. He shoved Coop. Coop, a drover and not a brawler, stumbled back against the wagon wheel. Eli moved. He didn't swing, just pushed the man back. A solid, hard shove. This ain't your concern. It is now, the miner said. He swung a clumsy fist. Eli ducked, but the second man came from the side, swinging a heavy piece of dunnage. Eli raised his arm to block the blow, the wood cracking against his bone. The third man, quicker and meaner, pulled a knife. He lunged, not at Eli, but at the weaker target, at Coop. Eli didn't have time to think. He shoved Coop hard, sending him sprawling into the mud, and took the lunge himself. The blade was sharp. It wasn't a deep stab, but it sliced across his ribs, a hot, searing line. Eli grunted. The air punched out of him, but his fist came around, connecting with the man's jaw. The man dropped, his head hitting the boardwalk. The other 2 miners saw the blood spreading on Eli's shirt. They saw the cold fury in his eyes. They weren't paid enough for this. They scrambled, running back toward the saloon. Coop was pale, his hands shaking. Eli, you're hit. God, he was coming for me. No, Eli said, pressing his hand to his side, the blood warm and wet between his fingers. He was coming for me. O'Rourke, hearing the commotion, ran out of his workshop. Get him inside, he barked. Get him to Nora, now! They half carried him to the clinic. Mara was inside, boiling bandages. She turned, saw Eli leaning on Coop, his shirt dark red, and her face went white. On the table, Nora ordered, her voice cutting through the panic. Coop, you get back to your wagon and you get out of this town, or you're next. Go on, we have him. Coop hesitated, looked at Eli, then nodded, his face grim. He left. Mara, Nora said, cutting the shirt from Eli's body. Get the hot water, the good whiskey, and my stitching kit, now! Mara moved, her hands automatic, though her mind was screaming. The wound was a clean slice, 4 inches long, welling with dark blood. Eli was pale, his jaw set, but he hadn't made a sound. It's clean, Nora said, probing the gash with carbolic-soaked fingers. Missed the vitals. The rib stopped it. You're lucky, Cowboy. She handed Mara the curved needle, already threaded with catgut. I'll hold the wound closed. You stitch. You have the steady hands. Girl. Mara looked at the needle, then at Eli. He was watching her. His trust was absolute. I can't. Nora, I'll hurt him. He's already hurt, Nora said flatly. You'll hurt him more if it gets infected. Do it. Mara took a shuddering breath. She dipped the needle in the whiskey, the alcohol stinging the air. She looked at Eli. Hold still, she whispered. She pushed the needle through his skin. He flinched, a sharp, ragged intake of breath, his hand clenched into a fist. I'm sorry. Don't be, he gritted out. Just finish. She worked. The room was silent, save for the sound of his breathing, the snip of Nora's scissors cutting the thread, and the faint scrape of the needle. Each time she pulled the thread tight, he flinched. Each flinch was a confession, a shared message of the pain he had taken for her. Her fear melted away, replaced by a fierce, focused tenderness. She was not just mending his skin, she was mending him. The intimacy in that hush was deeper than any kiss. It was built in the smell of blood and whiskey, in the shared pain, and in the absolute faith he had placed in her hands. When she tied the last knot, her fingers were stained with his blood. "Good," Nora said, applying a thick bandage. "He stays here. He'll fever tonight." By noon, Dwyer had his victory. He tacked the notice to the board himself, hammering it in with relish. Wanted, Eli Brecken, for assault with a deadly weapon and inciting a riot. The miners who had attacked him were now the victims. The story was that the outsider Cowboy, drunk and angry, had attacked 3 peaceful citizens, stabbing 1. The town split. Pike's men and the saloon crowd cheered. Finally, the law was cracking down. But others, the O'Rourkes, the families Nora tended, the merchants who hated Pike's levies, looked away, ashamed. Eli was now a fugitive, hiding in the back room of Nora's clinic. He can't stay there, O'Rourke said that evening. They were in his workshop. Dwyer will search Nora's place first. He knelt by his heavy workbench, the one he used for cabinets, and pulled at a false board in the floor. Beneath it was a small, dark, dust-free compartment. The copies of the ledger were already there, wrapped in oilcloth. "He'll hide here, under my bench," O'Rourke said. "But we need a way to talk. We can't be seen together." As if summoned, Jesse, the livery boy, slipped in through the back door. He'd been watching the clinic. "He's awake," Jesse whispered. "Mrs. O'Rourke sent me." O'Rourke looked at the boy, then at Mara. "Jesse, you're a fast runner, and you know every alley and shed in this town." Jesse stood up straighter. "You are now our runner," O'Rourke said, his voice low and serious. "You will take messages between me, Nora, and Mara. No one else. You see or hear anything, you come to one of us. You are the only safe hands. Can you do that?" Jesse nodded, his face grave. He was a spy now. The pressure tightened. Pike was not just squeezing Eli. He was squeezing the man he knew was the weakest link. 2 days later, Nora came to the workshop, her face a grim mask. "It's Anna Hales, Deacon's wife. She's worse. The lung fever is breaking her, and she's in terrible pain." "I sent laudanum," Mara said. "Pike cut her off," Nora said, her voice shaking with rage. "He told Dr. Miles to stop the prescription, claimed it was too costly for a mine employee's family. He's sending a message to Deacon. He's telling him, 'I control your wife's pain. I control her life.' Deacon is falling apart." Mara felt a cold dread. Pike was winning. She left the workshop and went back to her boarding room. She had nothing. The silver dollars Eli gave her were long since spent on food. She looked at the cedar box. It was worthless. She pulled out the one thing she had left, her grandmother's heavy wool shawl, the one Hoadley had offered $35 for, then refused. She waited. She knew the routes. A traveling peddler, an old man who answered to no syndicate, was due. His wagon, full of pots, tonics, and fabrics, passed on the South Road every 2 months. She met him at the edge of town, where the trail turned toward the hills. "What will you give me for this?" she asked, holding out the thick, patterned wool. The peddler felt the weave. "It's good wool, Scottish, old, but good. You cold girl." "I need medicine," she said. He looked at her, his eyes wise. "Not for you." He went to the back of his wagon and pulled out a small, dark bottle. "Doctor, Finley's soothing syrup. From back east. Pure opium and alcohol. It'll quiet a cough, or a pain, or a screaming child faster than anything the syndicate doctor has. Mara recognized the bottle. It was 4 times the strength of the watered-down laudanum in the clinic. "I'll take it," she said. She handed him the shawl, the last piece of her family. He handed her the bottle. She gave the medicine to Nora, who smuggled it to Deacon Hales. "Tell him it's from a friend," Nora said. Mara never told Eli what she had sold. She just pulled her thin coat tighter and felt the cold in a new, deeper place. The day before the circuit judge was due, the sky turned yellow. It started at mid-afternoon. A hard, dry wind began to blow from the plains, not with rain, but with grit. A low, brown cloud appeared on the horizon, and it moved fast. Within an hour, it swallowed the sun. The world went dark. Grit began to skate across the roofs, a high, whining sound like millions of insects. Visibility fell from 100 yards to 10, then to the length of a man's arm. The air became thick, unbreathable, tasting of dust and alkali. It was a storm hard as nails, a true plains duster. Mara was at the clinic, helping Nora nail canvas over the window frames. "This will last," Nora yelled over the roaring wind. "This kind strips paint from wood and buries fences." Through the howl of the storm, Mara heard a crash from the back room, the door that led to the alley. It burst open. 2 men stumbled in, coughing, their faces wrapped in bandanas. Mara recognized them. Pike's men, the ones from the alley fight. "There she is," one of them yelled, his voice choked with dust. "Grab her! Pike wants her now!" Nora screamed and threw a jar of alcohol, which smashed against the man's chest. Mara scrambled, but one of the men grabbed her by the arm, his fingers digging in like claws. Jesse, who had been sheltering in the O'Rourke's root cellar, heard the scream cut through the wind. He burst out into the brown, roaring blindness. Choking, he ran, feeling his way along the wall, to the workshop. "Mr. O'Rourke, Eli, they're in the clinic. They've got Mara." Eli was in the hidden compartment, his wound throbbing, the air thick with sifted dust. He heard Jesse's muffled cry. He pushed the floorboard up. "What?" "Pike's men. They're taking her." Eli didn't wait for O'Rourke. He grabbed a heavy wooden mallet from the workbench and plunged into the storm. He couldn't see. He couldn't breathe. The wind tore at him, stinging his face with grit. He ran, coughing mud, his ribs screaming in protest. He followed the faint sound of Nora's shouts, feeling his way along the buildings. He found the clinic's back door. One man was dragging Mara out, her feet trying to find purchase. Eli swung the mallet with all his strength. It connected with the man's back with a sickening thud. The man collapsed, his grip on Mara loosening. The other man turned, pulling a gun, but Eli was on him, a fist connecting with his throat. The man gagged, dropping the pistol, and clawed his way back into the storm, swallowed by the dust. Eli shoved Mara inside, slammed the door, and dropped the heavy bar. They were trapped. The clinic was a small wooden box in a roaring, dark sea. O'Rourke, Nora, and Jesse were in the main house, safe. Eli and Mara were in the clinic, alone, the doors barred. They slumped to the floor, their backs against the examination table. Panton_G. The only light was a single lantern, guttering in the dusty air, casting huge, dancing shadows. The wind howled, a freight train of ghosts trying to tear the building apart. "He tried to take me," Mara whispered, her voice shaking. "He won't," Eli said. He was coughing, spitting dust. His hand found hers in the dark, and he held it. They sat in silence for a long time, just listening to the world try to end. "I used to dream," Mara said, her voice so quiet he had to lean in. "About a room, a small room, maybe in an old freight office, filled with books, where anyone could go and learn their letters." Just be quiet, not be afraid." She gave a small, dry laugh. "Foolish, I guess." "It's not foolish," Eli said. His voice was rough. He looked at his own calloused hands in the dim light. "I had a place once, back in Ohio. My PA left it to me. I wasn't a farmer." He stopped, the confession rising in his throat. "There was a girl, Sarah. Her PA owned the next farm. We were to be married." Mara turned her head, listening. "The drought came. The bank called the note. I couldn't make it work. I lost the farm." He stared at the floor, seeing the past. "She couldn't marry a man with nothing? She married the man who bought my land. I ran. I just rode west. Haven't stopped." He had told her his deepest shame. She had told him her deepest dream. The closeness in the dark, with the storm howling for their blood, was absolute. He turned to her. She turned to him. He touched her face, his thumb gently wiping a smear of grit from her cheek. This was not the frightened comfort of their first night, nor the desperate relief of the second. This was something else. Their want was a lifeline. It was a fierce present now against the end of the world. It was not a sin. It was an anchor. They crossed that boundary, neither careful nor careless. Just two people, fiercely present, finding the only solid ground left to them. Afterward, they did not sleep. They sat shoulder to shoulder, his arm around her, her head resting on his chest. They listened as the storm, like a spent beast, finally began to pass. Dawn revealed a new, alien world. The wind was gone. A profound, muffled silence lay over the valley. The town was buried in drifts of fine, yellow silt, like diseased snow. Fences were gone. A wagon was buried to its bed. Chickens, half buried, were pecking their way out of the dust. But the town, bruised and battered, was still standing. And Alton Pike was ready. He didn't wait for the town to dig out. He walked through the silt drift straight to Deacon Hales' small house. Dwyer was with him, along with 4 armed mine guards. Pike kicked the door open. He dragged Deacon out into the street in his nightshirt. "Deacon Hales," Pike shouted, his voice carrying in the dead, still air. "You are under arrest for forgery." People began to emerge from their homes, their faces dirty, eyes wide and frightened. A crowd gathered. Deacon was on his knees in the dust, sobbing. "This man," Dwyer announced, holding up a sheaf of papers, fake copies, hastily made, "has been forging syndicate documents. He created these lies to blackmail Mr. Pike." He tried to blame his own thievery on the town's leadership. The crowd, confused and angry, jeered. Deacon was the perfect scapegoat, weak, afraid. "No," Deacon whimpered, his face streaked with tears and dust. "No, I didn't. Please, it was me." Mara's voice was clear and cold. She stepped out of the crowd. Eli was right behind her, his hand on his injured side, his face set like stone. "I made the copies," Mara said, loud enough for all to hear. "The real copies. Deacon Hales is innocent. He only did it because Pike is holding his wife's medicine. He's a thief, and Pike is a liar." There was a collective, horrified gasp. Dwyer smiled. This was better than he'd hoped. Well, a confession. Mara Kincaid, you are under arrest for theft, forgery, and conspiracy." He lunged, grabbing her arm. "No." Eli stepped in front of her, pushing her behind him. He held his hands up, open and empty. "You want someone? Take me." "Eli, no!" Mara cried, grabbing his arm. "You arrest her. You'll have to arrest me, too," Eli said to Dwyer, ignoring her. "And I'm the one you already have a warrant on. Let's settle that. Take me. Let her go." Dwyer looked at Pike. The cowboy was the bigger threat. The girl was nothing. Pike gave a slight, satisfied nod. "Fine. Dwyer spat. He shoved Eli toward one of the guards. Lock him in the cell. Assault, riot, and now conspiracy. We'll see how you talk to the judge from there. He turned back to Mara, his face glowing with triumph. And you're a vagrant, a troublemaker. I want you out of this town by sunset. If I see your face after the sun goes down, I'll arrest you for vagrancy, and I promise you, you'll spend 6 months in the territorial jail. Eli was dragged away and locked in the jail's single, dark cell. Mara was left standing alone in the dusty street. She had until sunset. She went to Nora's. The clinic was a wreck, but Nora was already organizing. Sunset, my foot, Nora said, her eyes flashing. She shoved a basket into Mara's hands. This is food from my pantry. Take it to Anna Hale's. Walk down Main Street. Let them see you. Let them see we don't abandon our own. In his workshop, O'Rourke was talking to 3 grim-faced miners, the men whose accident reports were in the copies. The judge will be here, O'Rourke said. He'll listen. You will speak. The town's quiet conscience was waking. 2 of the churchwomen who had whispered about Mara met her at Deacon's door, adding a loaf of their own bread to the basket. What Pike did to Deacon, it's not Christian, one of them said, refusing to meet Mara's eyes, but holding her ground. They were willing to speak of the levies. Night fell. The deadline passed. Mara was supposed to be gone, but she was hiding in the shadows of O'Rourke's workshop, watching the jail. Jesse slipped out of the darkness. He'd been gone for an hour. He came to Mara and pressed something cold and metal into her hand. A key. It's the cell key, he whispered, his voice trembling with pride and terror. I made a copy. Last year, from a wax impression. Back when Dwyer hired me to sweep the jail, I always thought it might be useful. Mara clutched it. Hope, sharp and painful, flooded her chest. They could run, right now. She moved like a shadow, slipping through the alleys to the back of the jail. There was one narrow, barred window. Eli? She whispered. A shadow moved in the darkness. Mara, you're still here. You fool. You have to go. Dwyer will. I have the key. Eli? She pushed the metal through the bars. Jesse got it. We can go. Right now. We can ride out before the judge even gets here. He was silent. His hand came up and took the key. She could feel the warmth of his skin. He held it for a long, agonizing moment. Then, his hand pushed the key back out to her. No, he said. What? Eli, they'll hang you. They'll lie. If I run, I'm a fugitive, he said, his voice hard and steady. If I run, I'm guilty. I'm just outsider trouble. I'm everything they say I am. He gripped the bars, his knuckles white in the gloom. That judge is coming. I want him to see me in the open. I want him to see me in his courtroom, not as a shadow he's hunting. This ends here. Mara, win or lose, it ends here. He let go of the bars. She was left standing in the cold dark, holding a key to a freedom he refused to take. The news arrived with a half-starved rider on a winded horse, the circuit judge's wagon, struggling over the rocky grade north of the pass, had broken an axle. The wheel was shattered. It would take 2 days, perhaps 3, to fetch a new one from the territorial depot and get it fitted. The spring hearings were delayed. The town, still digging itself out from the drifts of silt, took the news with a collective groan, but not everyone. Alton Pike stood on the boardwalk of Main Street, a fresh cigar in his hand, and he permitted himself a small, satisfied smile. His problem, Eli Brecken, sat in a cell. The girl, Mara Kincaid, was a marked vagrant. Her deadline to leave long past. He had 2 more days to tighten his grip. Sheriff Dwyer, standing beside him, was less composed. He was gloating. 2 more days. Pike, Dwyer said, loud enough for the merchants sweeping dust from their stores to hear. That ought to be enough time to smoke out every rat, starting with that vagrant whore. I want her found." She defied a direct order to leave. Mara was not gone. She was hiding in the small attic room above Nora O'Rourke's kitchen, where the air was thick with the smell of dried herbs and lye soap. She felt like a criminal, listening to Dwyer's men moving through the town, their voices loud and coarse. "She has to eat," Nora said, her face grim. "We all have to eat. We need water." Mara knew Nora was right. The clinic's water barrel was low, and Nora couldn't be seen doing Mara's chores. With the clinic half ruined by the storm, they were using the main house. "I'll go," Mara said. "I'll go to the town well. He wants to make a show of me. Let him." She took 2 buckets and walked out into the dusty, cold air. She made it halfway down Main Street. The town was hostile. The dust storm had frayed every nerve, and Dwyer's pronouncement had given them a target for their misery. A group of men, loafers from the saloon, were standing near the cafe. "There she is," one of them yelled. "Dwyer's looking for you, girl." "Thought you was supposed to be gone," another shouted. Mara kept her head down, her gaze fixed on the well pump. She reached for the handle. A clod of mud, wet, heavy silt from the storm's leavings, struck her in the back. It spattered across her shoulders. She flinched, but did not turn. "Look at that! She don't even notice!" Another handful struck her, this one hitting her hair. Laughter followed. "Vagrant!" a man snarled. "You and your cowboy friend burned this town." She pumped the water, her arms shaking, tears of pure, cold rage burning in her eyes. As she lifted the heavy buckets, a man stepped in front of her and kicked one. The bucket flew from her grip, the precious water splashing into the mud. "Get out of our town," he spat. "That is quite enough. Mr. Slocum." The voice was not loud, but it was sharp as a clean needle. Mrs. Hallowell, the sexton's wife, stood on the boardwalk. Beside her were 2 other women from the church sewing circle. They were not smiling. The man, Slocum, faltered. "Now, Mrs. Hallowell, this ain't your business. She's a criminal. She is Nora O'Rourke's helper, fetching water for the clinic," Mrs. Hallowell said, descending the steps. "And you are a grown man behaving like a vicious child. Be ashamed." She walked straight to Mara. The men, suddenly cowed by the 3 women, shuffled, muttered, and broke apart. Mrs. Hallowell retrieved the bucket. "Come, child," she said, her voice softening. She took in Mara's mud-stained dress and shaking hands. "Let's get you clean." They took her to the church vestry, away from the street. They pumped fresh water into a basin. One of the women, Mrs. Davies, gently washed the mud from Mara's hair. Mrs. Hallowell produced a folded bundle from a cupboard. "This was for the charity box," she said, "but it seems charity is needed here." It was a clean dress, made of gray wool, simple and sturdy. It was not new, but it was whole, respectable, and warm. Mara, overwhelmed by a kindness she had forgotten existed, could not speak. She just looked at the women, her eyes asking why. Mrs. Davies, the one who had washed her hair, paused, her own eyes full of a distant, personal pain. "This is a hard town, child," she said, her voice low. "It likes to name people, especially women. I know what it is to be named wrong. Now you put that on. You will face them clean." As Mara, in the clean gray dress, walked back to Nora's, a new sound cut through the street. Hoofbeats, 4 riders, coming in fast from the north. It was Coop, Eli's partner. He wasn't alone. With him were 3 other men, older, with faces like cured leather. They were trail bosses, and they rode with their rifles in their scabbards, not on their saddles. They looked like men who had come for business, not pleasure. They dismounted, not at the saloon, but at the livery. Dwyer and Pike, who had been watching Mara's humiliation from the land office, came out. The posture of the street had changed in an instant. Pike's miners, who had been loafing, suddenly looked less like a mob and more like employees. The trail bosses were sovereign. "Sheriff," Coop said, his voice flat. He didn't tip his hat. "Coop," Dwyer said, trying to sound hearty. "Thought you were well on your way to Montana." "Had a change of plans," Coop said. "These are my associates. Mr. Abel, Mr. Stone, Mr. Patterson. They run the northern herds. They're here to talk about the levies, mister. Pike has been charging for river crossing and cattle feed. Seems your prices are fixed, and your feed is half rotten." The boss named Abel spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust near Dwyer's boot. "We heard you also jailed one of our men, Eli Brecken, on a false charge." Dwyer's face turned purple. "That is a territorial matter. He assaulted 3 men. We're here to make it our matter," Abel said. "We'll wait for the judge." Pike, seeing the situation escalating, stepped forward. "Gentlemen, this is a misunderstanding. Perhaps we can discuss this in my office." "We'll discuss it in the street," Coop said. "Or we'll discuss it in the courtroom. Your man Brecken. We want to see him." Pike knew he was losing. The cattlemen held the entire town supply line in their hands. If they blacklisted the town, it would starve before the mine paid its next dividend. "Dwyer," Pike said, his voice cold. "Allow them to see the prisoner. 1 man, for 5 minutes." Coop went into the jail. The trail bosses waited outside, their hands near their belts. The entire town watched. The balance of power had shifted. That night, Pike's control, which had been absolute, was now fractured. The judge was coming. The trail bosses were here. The ledger copies were out there. He was cornered. He summoned Dwyer to the assay office in the dead of night. "This is your fault," Pike hissed, his cold composure finally cracking. "Your inability to control 1 girl and 1 cowboy has brought this down on us." "Me?" Dwyer sputtered. "You're the one who hired Calloway, who let them get in here." "Silence," Pike said. "We have 1 night. The judge will be here tomorrow or the day after. We have to remove the problem." "The trail bosses?" Dwyer asked, pale. "We can't." "Not them. The problem is Brecken. He's the center of it. He's the one who won't run. He's the one who gives them courage. He has to be removed." "Removed? You mean—" Dwyer couldn't say it. Pike looked at him with utter contempt. "He's a prisoner. Bram. Prisoners try to escape. They get shot. It's simple." Dwyer sweated. "I can't. Not with those trail bosses in town. They'll burn the jail to the ground." "You are a coward," Pike said. He paced. "Then we change the story. We don't make him an escapee. We make him a monster." He looked toward Nora's clinic, the center of the resistance. "He's already accused of assault. We add arson. We add murder." Dwyer's eyes widened. "The clinic? It's where they hide. It's where they plot. It's where she stitched him up." "It's poetic," Pike said. "You'll hire drifters, men with no name. They'll start a fire, a big one, in the confusion. They'll yell that they saw Brecken, that he escaped, that he's burning the town that jailed him. In the panic, maybe the fire even reaches the jail. A terrible accident. The prisoner, lost in the smoke. The problem, removed." Dwyer, more coward than killer, was relieved. He didn't have to pull a trigger. He just had to find the matches. "I know 2 men," he said. "They'll do it for $50. The town slept under a cold, clear sky. At 2 a.m, the smell of kerosene woke Mara. She sat bolt upright in the attic room. Smoke, acrid and thick. She heard a crackle, not from the kitchen stove, but from outside, from the clinic wing. "Nora!" she screamed, scrambling down the narrow ladder. "Nora! Fire!" Nora burst from her bedroom, pulling a robe on. "The clinic! Mrs. Evans! The baby!" Mara's blood ran cold. She had forgotten. A ranch wife, Sarah Evans, who had given birth just before the dust storm, was too weak to be moved. She and her newborn son were in the clinic's one recovery room. They burst out the back door. The clinic wing was already going up. Flames licked up the dry siding, roaring in the night. "Get the door," Nora yelled. Mara ran, not to the main clinic door, but to the small side door of the recovery room. It was locked from the outside. "It's barred," Mara screamed, pulling on it. Inside, they could hear the baby wailing and the mother's thin, terrified cry. "Stand back." Nora grabbed a heavy chopping axe from the woodpile and began to swing, shattering the wood around the lock. The sound of the fire and Nora's axe woke the town. Shouts of "Fire! Fire at the clinic!" echoed down Main Street. Doors slammed open. Men ran, half-dressed, toward the red glow. At the jail, Jesse, who had been sleeping in the livery, ran to the sexton's house. He hammered on the door. Mr. Hallowell, the sexton, who also held the town keys, opened it. "Mr. Hallowell, it's the clinic. Pike's done it. You have to let Eli out. He'll burn." Hallowell, his face pale, grabbed the ring of keys. He had seen the way the town was turning. He'd heard his wife defend Mara. He gave the keys to the boy. "Go, Jesse. It is God's will." Jesse sprinted to the jail, his feet flying. He found the cell key, his hands shaking. "Eli, fire!" Eli was already awake, the smell of smoke thick in his cell. Jesse fumbled the key into the lock, twisted it. The door swung open. "They're at the clinic," Jesse gasped. "Mara, Nora, there's a mother inside." Eli didn't run for the hills. He ran straight toward the flames. Nora broke the door open. Smoke billowed out, thick and black. Mara, holding a wet cloth over her face, plunged inside. "I've got her." She found Sarah Evans, who was trying to crawl, clutching her swaddled infant. "Help me," the woman wheezed. Mara grabbed the woman, pulling her up. Nora took the baby. Together, they stumbled out of the inferno just as the roof began to groan. Eli arrived, his face black with soot. He saw Mara, safe, and his gaze went to the fire. It was moving toward Nora's house. "A bucket line!" he roared, his voice cutting through the panic. "To the well, now!" Men, stunned to see the fugitive, hesitated for only a second before O'Rourke, already there, yelled, "You heard him! Move!" The line formed. Coop and the 3 trail bosses appeared, organizing the men, their voices adding authority. Eli, his bandaged hands raw, took his place. He worked, the pain in his ribs a dull fire, his hands screaming as the rope handle of the bucket bit into the burned skin from the fire line just days before. The clinic's main door, burning like a torch, was about to collapse inward, which would spread the fire to the house. "It's going!" O'Rourke yelled. Eli left the line. He grabbed a broken fence post, braced his feet, and shoved it against the burning frame. With a roar, he pushed the entire flaming structure outward, into the street, away from the house. It crashed onto the muddy ground in a shower of sparks. His bandages, his hands, were smoking. In the wild, flickering light, 2 men were seen slipping away into the alley behind the saloon. They were not townsfolk. Coop saw them. "Those 2, he yelled to Abel. "They don't belong." The drifters fled. One of them, scrambling over a fence, was suddenly snapped back as if by a lasso. O'Rourke, holding the end of a long coil of rope he'd grabbed from his workshop, pulled it tight. The man fell hard. Coop and the trail bosses were on him in an instant. "Who paid you?" Abel demanded, pressing the barrel of his pistol to the man's head. The drifter, terrified, his arm broken from the fall, confessed. "It was Dwyer, the sheriff. He paid us $50, said to light the clinic. Yell the Cowboy did it. It was Pike's man who gave him the money." A cold, sick silence fell over the bucket line. The fire was dying. The clinic was a smoldering ruin. But the house stood. Dawn broke, bruised and purple. The sky was the color of an old wound. The town stood, ankle-deep in ash and silt, and looked at itself. They looked at the ruins of the clinic, the only place of healing. They looked at Eli Brecken, his hands wrapped in bloody rags, his face black, standing quietly by the well. They looked at Mara, her gray dress stained with soot, comforting the crying mother. And they looked at each other. They did not like what they saw. Later that morning, Judge Bryson arrived, his face grim. His black coat was already stained with the soot that still hung in the air. He saw the smoldering clinic, the armed trail bosses, and the exhaustion on the faces of the people. My court was to be held in the town hall, he said, his voice deep. Mr. Hallowell stepped forward. The hall is full of smoke, Your Honor, and the air in this town is foul. Perhaps the church. The judge nodded. Court will convene in the church in 1 hour. The church was packed. The windows were thrown open to the chill air. Judge Bryson sat at the front, the altar behind him. Coop and the trail bosses stood at the back. Dwyer, pale and sweating, stood at the front, beside a rigid, silent Alton Pike. Eli was brought in, his hands freshly bandaged by Nora, and sat in the front pew. Mara, Nora, and O'Rourke sat behind him. The hearing began. This is an inquiry, the judge announced, into the charges against Mr. Eli Brecken and into the general state of this town. He called the injured miners first. Timbers, his leg splinted, was carried in. He told of the accident and of the $50 he was paid to keep silent about the $300 insurance claim. He called Nora O'Rourke. She spoke of the levies. She spoke of Anna Hales, of medicine withheld, of fear used as a weapon. Her voice was clear and angry, and it did not waver. He called Mara Kincaid. She walked to the front, holding the ink-stained copies. She did not look at Pike. She looked at the judge. These are copies, Your Honor, from Mr. Pike's private ledger. I took them. Mr. Hales helped me. She laid them on the table. They show the kickbacks, and they show this. She pointed. My own levy, $50 for non-inspection of fire damage. It was a lie, a debt invented to keep me trapped here. Pike's lawyer stood. Objection! These are forgeries. This is the word of a known vagrant and a... It is the truth. Deacon Hales stood up. He was shaking, his face wet with tears, but he was standing. In his hands, he held the heavy leather-bound ledger. I have the original, Your Honor, Deacon said, his voice thin but carrying in the silence. Pike went white. Dwyer looked ready to collapse. I was a coward, Deacon said, walking forward. I was afraid. He used my wife. He used her pain. But when I saw the fire, when I saw him burn down the place of healing, I knew I would rather die than serve him. He placed the ledger on the judge's table. The copies are true, every word. The judge opened the book. He looked at the copies. He looked at the ledger. They matched. Pike moved. He was not a man, but an animal. He lunged, a wordless snarl in his throat, his hands reaching, not for the judge, but for Deacon Hales. Before he took 2 steps, Coop and O'Rourke had him, driving him back, his arms pinned. Order, the judge roared. The trial was over. I will hear from Mr. Brecken, the judge said, his voice low. Eli stood up. He looked at the miners, at Deacon, at Mara. He turned and looked at Pike, who was breathing hard, held by the trail bosses. I'm not an eloquent man, Your Honor, Eli said, his voice quiet. I came here to move cattle. I stayed because I saw things that were wrong. He looked at the crowd. I don't name Mr. Pike a devil. That's too easy. He just saw that folks were hungry, and he saw they were afraid. And he used that. He used their fear to make them mean. He used their hunger to make them cheap. He didn't break this town. He just found the cracks. That's all I have to say. The room was utterly still. Eli had named them all. Judge Bryson looked at the ledger for a long time. He closed it. "Mr. Alton Pike," he said, "you are hereby taken into custody, to be held for the territorial authorities on charges of fraud, conspiracy, extortion, and attempted arson. Mr. Dwyer, you are removed from the office of sheriff, effective immediately. Pending your own trial as an accomplice. All syndicate levies are suspended. The debts listed in this ledger are null and void." He looked at Eli. "As for you, Mr. Brecken, the charges of assault and inciting riot are dismissed, as it is clear you were the victim. However, the charge of public disturbance from the saloon fight remains. This court fines you a token, $1. O'Rourke stepped up, reaching into his pocket. "However," the judge said, holding up a hand. He looked down from the bench, his gaze falling on Eli's bandaged, ruined hands. "Mr. Hallowell has testified to seeing you at the fire. I see the blisters from the rope burns. This court waives the fee. You are free to go. Mr. Brecken." In the churchyard after, the sun was cold but bright. Pike and Dwyer were led away, their hands bound. The townspeople filed out, quiet, not meeting one another's eyes. Mara stood by the steps, breathing the clean, cold air. Mrs. Davies, the churchwoman, approached her. She pressed a small bundle into Mara's hand. It was fresh bread. We are sorry, Mara," she said, and hurried away. Another man, a merchant, nodded. We judged wrong." Not all of them spoke. Not all of them were sorry. But it was enough. It was enough to make the breath in her chest come easier. The weight was not gone, but it was lifted. Spring tipped toward summer, and the land, freed from its prison of mud and silt, came alive. The high grasses, fed by the flood and the sun, rippled like green fire across the hills. In the pastures, newborn calves, all legs and wobble, followed their mothers. The air, finally clean, smelled of pine and sweet clover. The town, too, began to heal. The first sign was the rebuilding bee for the clinic. It was not an order from a syndicate, but a quiet consensus. Samuel O'Rourke, the carpenter, laid the new foundation, his hammer blows ringing clear in the morning air. Mr. Hallowell, the sexton, organized the lumber, and men who had once looked at Eli with suspicion now worked beside him, raising the new walls. The women of the church, led by Nora, served coffee and bread, their chatter replacing the whispers. The mine, under an interim foreman sent from Cheyenne, reopened. The wages were just as thin, the work just as backbreaking, but the shakedowns had paused. The suffocating fear that Pike and Dwyer had wielded was gone, and the men breathed easier. The most telling change was a small, slotted wooden box that appeared on the counter of the Prairie Rose Cafe. Mrs. Gable had placed it there herself. A neatly lettered sign read, "For the Hales family." Deacon, cleared of all charges, was recovering his nerve. But Anna, his wife, was still gravely ill. The box filled steadily with coins and scrip. The town, in its clumsy way, was making amends. Eli Brecken's ribs had healed, leaving a pale, thin scar that matched the one on his jaw. His hands, blistered raw from the fire, were covered in new, pink skin. He was whole again. Coop and the trail bosses, their business concluded, were riding north to meet the herds. "There's a foreman's job waiting for you in the Bighorns, Eli," Coop said, his hand on his saddle horn. "A good one, full pay and a line cabin. You earned it." It was the life he had always known, the open range, the long sky, the clean work of moving cattle. He looked north, toward the mountains, then back at the half-rebuilt clinic. at the new lumber shining in the sun. He shook his head, offering his hand to his friend. I appreciate it, Coop, but I think I'm done. Done? Done with what? With roads, Eli said, his voice quiet. I'm tired of roads that don't lead home. I think I'll see what it feels like to stay put. Coop looked at him for a long moment, then at Mara, who was coming out of the mercantile. He nodded slowly. Well, you keep your scalp, son. He swung into his saddle, raised a hand in farewell, and led his men out of town. Mara watched them go, the dust of their departure settling. In her hand, she held a small, heavy cloth bag. Mr. Hoadley, the storekeeper, had called her in that morning. He had not been able to meet her eyes. I've been looking over my books. Miss Kincaid, he'd stammered, polishing his counter with a nervous rag. In the chaos of the flood, I seem to have miscalculated the value of your bartered goods. The shawl, the box. A terrible error. He had pushed the bag toward her. $43. Her full stage fare and more. The stage to Cheyenne leaves on Tuesday. He'd added quickly, I can secure you a seat, if you like, as an apology for my error. Now she stood on the boardwalk, the coins heavy in her palm. It was the thing she had bled for, the price of her escape. The door was open. Eli walked up to her, his shadow falling across her. He saw the money. He said nothing, just looked at her face. Walk with me, he said. They left the town behind, climbing the high hill to the south, the one where the wind always blew, scattering the last of the winter's memory. From the top, they could see the whole valley, the river a silver ribbon, the town a small wood and dust smudge in the vast green. You have your fare, he said. Yes, she opened her hand, looking at the coins. I can leave on Tuesday. He nodded, turning his face to the wind. That stage goes east. I came from there. And I've never been anywhere else but here, she said, her voice small. He turned to her, his eyes clear and serious. Mara, what we felt, in your room, during the storm, in the clinic, with the dust so thick we couldn't breathe. That wasn't an accident. It wasn't just fear or the cold. I know, she whispered. I want to build something, he said, the words rough, as if he were pulling them from the earth. Something that won't blow away in the first hard wind. She clutched the coins, her knuckles white. Eli, I'm afraid. He looked confused. Of what? Of me? No. She shook her head, the words tumbling out. I'm afraid of this. I've spent my whole life in debt. First, the whispers about the fire. Then Pike's levy, a debt I didn't even owe. It was a chain. It was a way to own me. I'm afraid this, she motioned between them. This feeling will just become another debt, another thing I have to pay for. Every day, by being what someone else wants. I'm afraid to owe anyone, anything, ever again. I don't know how to love someone and still be free. His face softened. He understood. He had his own ghosts. I've been running, he said, looking out at the horizon. For years, back in Ohio. I told you I lost my farm. There was a woman, Sarah. We were to be married. When the bank took the land, I had nothing. It wasn't just being poor. Mara, I was empty. I looked at her, and she looked at me, and I knew I didn't have what she needed. Not just money, strength, a way to stand. So I ran. I rode west, and I never looked back. He turned to her, his shame laid bare. I've been running from that moment ever since. What you're afraid of, owing someone. I'm afraid of the other side. I'm afraid of not having enough to give. What if I'm still that man, the one who runs when the wind blows hard? They stood in the silence, their two deepest fears laid out on the hilltop. Mara took a deep breath. She looked at her hand. She closed her fingers, one by one, over the coins. Then she shoved the bag deep into her pocket. "That old freight office," she said, pointing down at the small, derelict building by the unused rail spur. "The roof is sound." Eli looked at it. A small smile touched his scarred mouth. "It is, but the door is crooked." "I'm not leaving on Tuesday," she said. "I'm going to use this money to buy books. I've always wanted a small reading room, a place where people can come and be quiet." "I know how to hang doors true," Eli said, "and I can build shelves. Mr. O'Rourke says the ranches are paying well for a man who can mend fences and break horses." They tested the shape of it, the words tentative, a small stove that drew well, a shelf for ledgers and a shelf for beans, a bright kerosene lamp for the long evenings, quiet, laughter, the smell of coffee, a life built not on grand promises, but on small, practical things that could be held and mended. They walked down the hill, not holding hands, but side by side, their shoulders almost touching. Their choice did not make the town a paradise. Social prejudice lingered, a sour groundwater beneath the surface, when Mara and Eli, together, walked into the mercantile to buy nails and lumber. Faces still turned. Whispers still followed them, though quieter now. Mrs. Gable served them coffee at the Prairie Rose, but she called Mara Miss Kincaid with a pointed, cold formality. One afternoon, as Mara was sweeping the dust from the freight office porch, Elder Davies, the churchman whose wife had shown her kindness, stopped. He cleared his throat, twisting his hat in his hands. "Miss Kincaid," he began, his voice heavy with reluctant duty. "The town, we are all grateful for the stand you and Mr. Brecken took, truly, but appearances must be considered." Mara stopped sweeping. "A young, unmarried woman," he continued, staring at the porch boards, "spending all her days and some evenings in a closed building with an unmarried man. It gives talk. It is not a respectable arrangement. People are concerned for your position." Mara looked at his kind, worried, rigid face. She felt a flash of the old, hot anger, the desire to scream at him, to ask where his concern was when she was being pelted with mud. Instead, she took a breath. The wind blew, and she was no longer a tumbleweed. "Thank you for your concern, Elder," she said, her voice clear and calm. "I will take it under advisement." She turned, put her hand on the new, bright blue door that Eli had just hung, unlocked it with a key she wore on a string around her neck, and went inside. Eli was at the back, planing a long pine board for a bookshelf. The sharp, clean scent of the wood filled the air, the sound of the plane, shh, steady and strong, was the only answer the elder needed. A week later, their new life was tested. A scream tore through the mid-afternoon quiet. Not a woman, but a man, a boy. Eli and Mara ran from the freight office. A small crowd was gathered by the livery. Jesse was on the ground. The new hostler, a man named Peters, was standing over him, white-faced. A green-broke Mustang, its eyes wide with terror, was bucking at the end of a rope. He threw him," Peters stammered. "He came down hard." Jesse was clutching his leg, his face gray and slick with sweat. He was trying not to cry, but the pain was too much. Mara pushed through. The leg, it was bad. His boot was at a terrible angle, and the sharp, white point of a bone was pushing against the fabric of his denims. The men stood helpless, horrified. "Don't move him," one said. "Someone get the doctor." Mara looked at Eli. Their eyes met. They knew what to do. "Eli, stay with him," she commanded, her voice cutting through the panic. "Keep him still. Talk to him." She turned, hitched up her gray wool skirt, and grabbed the reins of the nearest horse tied to the rail. In one motion, She was on its back, riding astride like a man, her hair coming undone. She galloped down the street toward Nora's, a comet of gray wool and determined fury. Eli knelt beside Jesse. The boy's eyes were wide, rolling with pain and fear. "It's all right, Jesse," Eli said, his voice the same low, calm rumble he had used on the sorrel in the storm. "It's just noise. It's just pain. It'll pass. You're all right. I'm right here." His hands, steady as a still pond, moved gently, assessing. He looked at O'Rourke, who had run up. "Samuel, I need 2 clean flatboards from your scrap pile, about this long, and rags, clean ones." O'Rourke ran. Eli kept talking, his hand on Jesse's shoulder, a solid, grounding weight. He carefully, expertly, used his knife to cut the denim away, exposing the wound. He pressed his own neckerchief against the worst of the bleeding. He did not falter. He did not look away. He held the boy's gaze, lending him his own calm. When Mara returned with Nora, breathless. Nora took one look at the clean wound, the pressure applied, and the 2 splint boards O'Rourke had brought. "Good man," Nora said to Eli. "Hold him. This will hurt." Together, the 3 of them, Nora, Mara, and Eli, worked in the dust of the street. They set the bone. They splinted the leg. They saved the boy's future. He would not lose the leg. He would walk. As they carried him to Nora's clinic, the town watched. They were no longer outsiders. They were the ones who ran toward the fire. The town, in its own slow way, decided to say thank you. The rebuilding of the clinic was finished. The freight office was clean. The shelves were up. The churchwomen proposed a picnic, a celebration to raise money for both Nora's clinic and Mara's new reading room. They gathered under the cottonwoods by the river, the grass thick and soft. A breeze carried the smell of clean dust and roasted meat. Someone played a fiddle, a fast, cheerful tune, and children raced in the shade. Nora spoke. O'Rourke spoke. Then they called for Mara. She stood on the bed of a wagon, her hands clasped, the wind playing with a loose strand of her hair. She looked at the faces, Mrs. Davies, smiling, Deacon Hales, his wife sitting pale but alive beside him, Jesse, his leg propped up on a stool, Mrs. Gable, who was, for the first time, not scowling. When I first came back to this town," Mara began, her voice shaking only a little, "I was trying to sell everything I owned, my mother's cedar box, my grandmother's shawl. I wanted to escape. I thought selling those things, getting that stage fare, would make me free." She paused, looking for Eli. He was leaning against a far tree, his arms crossed, watching her. His gaze was steady. "I learned something," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I learned that freedom isn't about running, and I learned that some things aren't for sale." She looked directly at the crowd. I found that I will not sell my own name ever again, and I found," her voice softened, "that I will not surrender a man who held me like I wasn't broken, just scared." Silence. A few eyes shone with sudden tears. Nora clapped, loud and firm. O'Rourke joined her, then the miners, the ranch wives, and finally, even Elder Davies, clapped, not all of them, but enough. At dusk, as the picnic fires were burning low, Eli and Mara slipped away. They walked behind the freight office, where the new shelves were visible through the clean window. The air was warm, smelling of summer rain and wood smoke. They stood facing each other, the quiet humming between them. He reached out, not to grab, but to offer. He traced the line of her jaw with his rough fingers, the same way he had in the storm. "You're a good speaker, Mara Kincaid," he murmured. "You're a good carpenter, Eli Brecken," she whispered back. Their embrace was unhurried. It was not the desperate, fearful clinging of their past. It was grateful. It was fierce with recognition. They had seen each other at their worst, their shame, their fear, their rage, and they had not run. Desire came, not like a blaze, but like summer rain, warm, steady, washing the last of the soot and the dust from the past. It was an intimacy without fear, a promise made not in words, but in the silent language of touch and breath. It was a vow. Weeks later, the reading room opened. Mara had painted a sign, her letters careful and clear, borrowed pages. The first visitors came on a bright Saturday, a miner's young daughter, her face scrubbed clean, who walked in and shyly asked for a book with pictures, and Jesse, leaning heavily on his new crutches, who grinned at Mara and asked for a dime novel about cowboys. That evening, the post rider brought a letter. It was from the territorial capital in Cheyenne. Mara lit the lamp in their small room, the one behind the reading room, and read it aloud to Eli. The territorial court had upheld Judge Bryson's rulings. Alton Pike, found guilty on all charges, had been sent east in chains to a federal prison. Bram Dwyer was permanently barred from public office, his name a disgrace. The last of the ghosts were gone. The season turned. The final scene was not of high drama, but of quiet, settled peace. Autumn light, the color of brass, poured over the valley. The hay was cut and stacked, smelling sharp and sweet. From the window of the reading room, Mara stacked books. She looked out. Eli was in the small yard, mending a section of fence. He worked with a steady, unhurried rhythm, his shoulders strong. He paused, as if he felt her gaze, and looked up. He didn't smile, not broadly, but his eyes softened. He nodded once. Mara nodded back. It was a look that needed no words. It said, "This is it." It said, "Home." The wind still blew. It was Wyoming. After all, it swept down from the mountains, rattling the window pane, carrying the first chill of the coming winter. But this time, it couldn't blow them loose. Thank you for listening to our story. We hope you enjoyed this journey. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let us know where you are listening from and what you thought of Mara and Eli's story. You can comment in English, and if you'd like more tales like this, please subscribe to From Wild West.